Hey, this is Dan,
Oh, and this is Ben.
and we are Villain for All Seasons. Today we are speaking with Norman Finkelstein, and he's going to talk to us about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and everything that is going on at the moment. So, Norm, welcome.
Thank you.
And Norman, I just wanted to kick things off with your explanation of what is happening.
When you say what is happening, if you can be a little more specific, because now it's a kind of a week into it, and there are many aspects of what's happening. So maybe you could just focus on what aspect you'd like me to talk on.
Certainly. I would say, can we talk about what kickstarted the events that are happening in Palestine?
Fortunately, in this particular case, what kickstarted them are pretty straightforward because they were part of a long-standing sequence of events which were closely documented. There are families in East Jerusalem. Israel was slating to evict them from their homes. It's part of a long-standing process by the State of Israel beginning in 1967 to what's called Judaized Jerusalem. That is to say, to turn Jerusalem into a city with a Jewish majority. And the way to turn the city into the Jewish majority is pretty straightforward. You dispossess the Palestinians and you replace them with Jewish settlers. And what was happening at Sheikh Jarrah was a pretty commonplace event in not just the occupied territories, not just occupied East Jerusalem, but it's a commonplace event in the history of Israel. And I'll get to that in a moment, but just to situate what's happening right now. The families in East Jerusalem who were slated for eviction, they were middle class families. They seem to have had reasonable connections. And so there were demonstrators, including Israeli Jews, who were out there trying to opposing the evictions from their homes of these East Jerusalem families. The police came in and acted quite brutally to try to break up the demonstrations in support of the families. The brutality then spread to Al-Aqsa Mosque, where Israel first tried to limit the number of worshipers who could pass through Damascus Gate to pray during Ramadan in the mosque. And then at some point, it invaded the mosque and it attacked the worshipers in the mosque. So there was a spillover from the Sheikh Jarrah demonstrators to the mosque. It was on Ramadan or during Ramadan. And then the attack on the worshipers occurred during the highest holy day of Ramadan. And that then triggered a reaction from the Islamic movement in Gaza. And there has been since then, as every one of your viewers and listeners knows, there's been another one of Israel's periodic murderous assaults on Gaza, which is ongoing as we speak.
And I wonder, Norman, so at the time of the recording right now, we've got from Washington Post said 212 Palestinians have been killed, 61 of them children, 36 women. Obviously, by the time this airs, I imagine it'll be quite a bit more than that. And I wonder if you have an analysis on why you think the public outcry against it, especially in the U.S., is there something different about public opinion of this instance that would separate it, say, from 2018 or 2014?
Yeah, something has changed. There's no question about that. It's very visible in its many manifestations of the change. Let's first get to the why, and then we can discuss the manifestations. It is a complicated question why this happened, this change in public opinion, a kind of sea change in public opinion. I would say there are two factors. The The first factor is the human rights organizations, the critical human rights organizations, have now shifted their position on Israel and the Palestinians. A few months ago, the Israeli human rights organization, B'Tselem, which is the leading Israeli human rights organization for the occupied territories, it issued a report. I have a report. Let's see if I can just get it quickly. Give me a half second.
Sure.
I'll just read you the title, not the text, just the title. The title of the report is A Regime of Jewish Supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, : This is apartheid. A regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, : This is apartheid. And that's a remarkable headline for 3 reasons. One, they're no longer confining themselves to just the occupied Palestinian territories, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. Up until now, the paradigm, the template, whatever you want to call it, has been Israel's here, the occupied Palestinian territories are there. Israel, we accept as it is, more or less. The issue is the occupied Palestinian territories. The desired outcome is 2 states, Israel here, occupied Palestinian territories become a Palestinian state, and that was called the 2-state solution. But now something new is happening. They're no longer talking about Israel here, occupied Palestinian territories there. They're saying there's 1 state. It's 1 state. They're no longer talking about Israel's more or less fine as it is. Now the Palestinians need a state. It's now saying it's 1 state and the whole state is problematic. The whole state is problematic. It's saying this state is built on Jewish supremacy. That's a problem. And then they take the next step and say, this Jewish supremacist state is an apartheid state. That was crossing a Rubicon when B'Tselem did that. And then last week, Human Rights Watch put out a report. B'Tselem was the main human rights organization in Israel monitoring Israeli crimes in the occupied Palestinian territories. Human Rights Watch is the main human rights organization in the world. It also happens to be, its headquarters is the United States. And it put out a report. And the report said the whole region, again, from the river to the sea, the whole region is a state based on, they didn't use the expression Jewish supremacy, they used the expression Jewish domination, which is not much different. And they said that in the occupied Palestinian territories of this state based on Jewish domination, Israel's committing crimes against humanity, which it described as, quote, among the most odious crimes in international law. It said Israel's committing the crime of persecution, which is a crime against humanity, and the crime of apartheid. So apartheid came up again. Not in B'Tselem, but now it's Human Rights Watch. So you had that element, a totally new, they are recasting the paradigm. It's no longer Israel, more or less okay, and now we need a Palestinian state. It's now saying we need something with the Palestinians, however, Israel not okay. Israel not okay. And then we had in the United States the past several years, the Black Lives Matter movement. And that sensitized the public, in particular, the Democratic Party, to issues of white supremacy, which was associated with Donald Trump, and white domination. So now along come these human rights organizations amidst this highly sensitized public to issues of racial domination and racial supremacy. Along come these Human Rights Watch reports that say Israel is a Jewish supremacist state based on Jewish domination, and it's in fact, not in effect, in fact, an apartheid state. Well, that became a lethal brew for Israel. Now everywhere, because I've been attending the demonstrations, everybody's saying the A word, Israel apartheid. Now, listen, I know this ambiance, this milieu inside out. I've been part of it for a half century. I'm embarrassed to say, or sad to say, or maybe proud to say, I don't know which. I never heard anything like this. It's kind of flabbergasting what's happened. That everybody's saying Israel apartheid and nobody's disagreeing. So we're in a new ballpark. We're in a new ball game. No question in my mind about it. You see it everywhere now. When I started out in the 1970s, there were a handful of supporters of the Palestinians. We would march down Fifth Avenue in New York. And we would chant really stupid slogans like, everybody should know we support the PLO. Dumb slogans, especially if you're Jewish. That was just not a particularly enlightened slogan. And I remember when I would walk down the streets, I'm dead serious. I was terrified that we were going to be shot. I was terrified there'd be snipers and we would be shot. This past weekend, I went to a demonstration in support of the Palestinians. There were thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people in a little neighborhood in Brooklyn. I'm serious, it's called Bay Ridge, a little neighborhood in Brooklyn. It was all 20-year-olds. It was exactly the same crowd that came out for the George Floyd demonstrations, the anti-police brutality demonstration, exactly the same crowd. No, it was more Arabs. Obviously, it was probably, let's call it 60% Palestinian Arabs, and 40% were not. They were all 20-something. It was so festive. I mean, it was angry, but also festive. The flags everywhere, the young people climbing the poles to hoist the Palestinian flag at the traffic lights. The cops were standing right there, didn't stop them. Nobody stopped them. That's half the story. The other half, which is even more amazing, it's even more amazing. In the past, whenever Israel came under attack, which of course is nonsense, but whenever Israel came under attack, there would be 1 million Jews bust in from everywhere on Fifth Avenue in a rally in support of Israel. All the politicians would come to, make their little support, or give their little speech in support of Israel. Well, guess what? We're now a week into the conflict. This is New York City. There hasn't been one demonstration in support of Israel. Not one. It's breathtaking what happened. Nobody wants to defend apartheid, It's very sobering what happened. And it's quite an amazing feat by the state of Israel. It's an amazing feat. It belongs in the Guinness Book of World Records. How a country managed to unite the whole world to hate them. Yeah, it's an amazing feat. They got what they deserved. So arrogant, so obnoxious, so self-righteous. The way they browbeat, intimidated, scared everybody into submission, trying to quiet them with their stupid, playing the Holocaust card, and then the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition of anti-Semitism, trying to muzzle everyone, quiet them. And you know what? For a while, I thought they were winning. Are you from the UK or the US? I can't remember now. Where are you guys from?
We're both from the States.
Oh, okay.
I live in London, but Dan lives in New York.
Right. It looked like they were on a roll in the UK.
Yeah.
They had Jeremy Corbyn on defensive, disaster in the election. They were Sturmer, or I prefer to call him Der Sturmer, was purging the whole Labour Party. They were forcing Oxford, Cambridge, all the universities to embrace the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which basically means you can't criticize Israel. That's the essence of the definition. They were on a complete roll. I thought they were going to win this juggernaut. And now, total disaster for them. Total disaster.
Norm, I had a quick question for you. Since we're talking about Brooklyn specifically and just the New York wider area as well, Cuomo and the BDS movement, how do you feel about that?
I don't want to get into, not that I'm in any way opposed to your question. People have the right to ask any question they want. I don't want to get into an argument about BDS right now. And in my opinion, BDS is a cult. Now, I've had a lot of experience in politics. I'm not a young man anymore. And I started when I was about 16. That was when people got started in politics in my era. It was the 1960s, and politics were all around you. And it was not unusual for high school students. I wouldn't say I was typical, but I also wouldn't say I was completely aberrant. So I've been around the block for a half century now. And I know what a cult is. A cult is when you have a guru, when you have mantras, when you have chants, when you have slogans without content, when you have no political analysis. It's a cult. And in my opinion, BDS degenerated into a cult quite rapidly, by the way. So I wouldn't have any truck in it for a very simple reason. I'm too old to be a groupie, and I'm too old to be a cult member. It's demeaning at my age to be a member of a cult. It's for young people to join cults. But when you see a person my age, grade, joining a cult, it looks a little bit silly. So I'm not going to join a cult. I'm not going to. What were those pants called that were shaped like this?
Bell bottoms?
Yeah. I'm not joining a cult at this age, and I'm not putting on bell bottoms.
Fair enough.
Or a paisley print shirt. So, but in principle, we should be clear about principles here. The Human Rights Watch, in its most recent report, A Threshold Crossed, it did support sanctions against Israel. It even called for freezing the assets of Israeli officials who come abroad if they're involved in the apartheid regime. It called for all sorts of punitive international measures in order to compel Israel to abide by the law. So I have no problem with that. But I do have a problem with organizations which, in my opinion, have what you might call, well, let's just put it this way. When I was in my early 20s, I was a Maoist. And I'm not about to go through that phase again. So I don't like gurus. I don't like mantras. I don't like slogans. And I do believe in thought. I study hard, try to analyze, and try to understand. I don't want to just go around. In the 1970s, it was everybody should know I support the PLO, and now it's BDS. It's a mantra without a content. That's my opinion. But I don't think it's right now at this moment, I don't think it's an important question. The important question in my mind at this moment is, we're in a moment of flux. We're in a moment of transition. The way the conflict was hitherto conceived is now rapidly being rendered obsolete. It was not, I should have made the point, which I forgot to, but now it came back to me. You asked what caused this change the sea change, and you correctly said as compared to 2018 during the Great March of Return and 2014 during Operation Protected Edge. I left out one element because I was asking a lot of young people at the demonstration I attended in my borough. I asked them, what accounts for the change? I was around in 2018. There were no demonstrations at all. There was nothing. There was zero here, zero. I was there, I know, it was zero. I asked, and one young woman, she was Jewish, she made the point that she said, I grew up in all the Holocaust stuff, Holocaust in the morning, Holocaust in the afternoon, Holocaust in the evening, Holocaust in summer camp. She said, I grew up in that kind of environment. And she said, when you see these Jewish guys breaking the windows of Arab stores, what do you think? What can, what else can you think except Kristallnacht, So that was another element. What was critical about that element was it was inside Israel.
Right.
The whole paradigm was Israel's fine. The problem is the occupied Palestinian territories. But now these pogroms are happening inside Israel. So that too forced a change of how we perceive the conflict. So, as I said, we're in a moment of flux now. I don't know what's going to congeal, and I don't know how long it's going to take to congeal. But the old formula has now been rejected by Israel's main human rights organization, by the main human rights organization in the world. And when I say the main human rights organization in the world, I'm talking about an organization which is not radical. Human Rights Watch is a very centrist, mainstream organization with strong ties to the Democratic Party. So it means the change has penetrated all the way into regions, sectors of the Democratic Party. So it's a new ball game. I don't know what's going to come. I don't think anyone knows. We're in that moment of flux and transition. So right now, people are going. I'll have to see how people reconfigure their thinking. But I don't want to sound too haughty about this, but I put the emphasis on thinking. You have to think through these things. You have to study them. You can't just use a slogan or a mantra to solve this question. And so I recognize the past is past. Something is changing now. I see it, and I have to adjust to it. Even at my ripe old age, I have to adjust to it. But I'm not going to rush to any hasty conclusions. I want to see where things go, and then I'll decide how to proceed.
Well,
and it's new.
On that note, this may be an unanswerable question, but so as we obviously sea changes in the world of social media and stuff with public opinion can happen quite fast, and I feel like by extension, then politics has to change a little faster. In certain ways, it does, at least, because there's a certain level of immediacy that's expected. But I wanted to ask you.
I want to just, if you don't mind, of course, I want to hear you out. I would just say we should be cautious about using the expression happens fast. It happened very slowly, and then it manifested itself.
Yeah.
But when I was in communication with my old friend, we're both now old friends, Professor Chomsky, and I was commenting to him over correspondence, this change, this sea change, and he said, yeah, he's not in a position to be active in the public anymore, but he said he's been receiving all of these emails and videos, and he's watching what's happening. And he wrote back to me, and he said, and I'm quoting him. He said, I seem to remember somebody writing a book after Operation Protective Edge titled, This Time We Went Too Far. And that was the book I wrote. Already, you might remember, especially the fellow Daniel from London, you might remember, how old are you guys? You're in your 30s or your 20s?
30.
30. 2007 is already a while ago. It's already 13 years ago.
Yeah.
Or I should say 2008-9, Operation Cast Lead. But during Operation Cast Lead, it was a turning point. There was a huge, massive outpouring against the Israeli massacre in Gaza during Cast Lead. It didn't yet yield any fruit. It began the process. And then as your name, Daniel, and your name is?
Ben.
That, as Ben pointed out, 2014 and 18, it was very quiet. But then the process that began in 2007, it combined with those other elements, the Black Lives Matter, the civil eruptions inside Israel, all the things, the shift in the position of the human rights organizations, and now it burst forth. It burst forth. Everything was slowly accumulating. And there were some setbacks. And now it's burst. The tide has burst the gates. And not a pretty picture for Israel. Not a pretty picture. That country is now despised.
So then do you see the world of academia catching up with where public opinion and politics are right now?
Look, academia is a very strange place. You're in New York. Are you associated with academia?
I'm in London, and yes, I am.
I don't know the British academic scene, but in the United States for the past, you would say 10 years, Palestine has been a very chic issue in academia. It's a strange phenomenon because on the one hand, it's been very radical chic. On the other hand, the Jewish lobby has been putting a lot of pressure to sanitize debate on Israel-Palestine. So if you're in London, you know the IHRA, and it's been the same thing here. So you had two things happening at once. On the one hand, the two big acronyms were BDS and BLM, Black Lives Matter and Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions. Those were the radical chic, you would call it, not litmus tests, or let's just for now call it litmus tests. You had to support BLM and BDS in order to be a certified radical academic. But on the other hand, yes, there were consequences for speaking out because the Jewish organizations were applying a lot of pressure from behind the scenes. So you had two things happening. Now, I would say in regions like academia, a report like HRW's has, the Human Rights Watch, has a lot of authority among liberals. When Human Rights Watch says Israel is committing crimes against humanity, among the most odious crimes in international law, including the crime of apartheid, it will be very hard. And you know, academia is a liberal place politically. I guess the ratio is something like 5-1 Democrat versus Republican. If you look at the polls, what percentage vote Republican versus Democrat? I think it's something like 5-1. It's a liberal place. And in liberal sectors, the HRW, before I was referring to the radical chic, but then there is the liberal sectors of academia, which are substantial. Radical chic is what, 10 or 20%. They're mostly in flaky majors, you know, comparative lit, ethnic studies, what other, gender studies, the flaky majors. But then there is the hardcore, serious majors, and they tend to be liberal. And when you now have the authority of Human Rights Watch, it will force a shift. And you have to keep in mind a very potent shift, because you're calling Israel an apartheid state. And Human Rights Watch did something else. It called into question the whole idea of a Jewish state. It did. It said this state is built on trying to, quote, I'm using their words, engineer a Jewish majority, at the expense of the non-Jewish population. And they said that's inherently discriminatory. And it said that the second pillar of this Jewish state, the first was the Jewish majority. The second was the expropriation and confiscation, illegal, of Palestinian land in order to make space for the Jewish majority. And they said that cannot be reconciled with international law. So Human Rights Watch crossed two Rubicons. Number one, it said Israel is practicing apartheid in the occupied Palestinian territories. But number two, which I consider bigger in the great scheme of things, they questioned the whole legitimacy of a Jewish state. It never said, of course, Israel doesn't have a right to exist as a state, but it did question whether Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state. Now, you guys are young. You won't remember in 1975, when the UN had this resolution before the General Assembly, Zionism is racism, that was denounced by the entire liberal mainstream community as being an outrage to say Zionism is racism. That was a huge event, the 1975 UN resolution. Well, guess what happened? 2 weeks ago, Human Rights Watch said, for all practical purposes, it said Zionism is racism.
Norm, I wanted to talk about.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable what happened.
I never thought I'd see it.
I didn't. I was shocked. I mean, I'm reading the pages and I'm thinking, do they realize what they're saying here? And you know what? I'll tell you the truth. I'm not sure. I'm not sure they fully realized it. You see, B'Tselem, its position paper limited itself to the present. It said, this is what Israel does. This is apartheid. Human Rights Watch did something altogether different. It went back to 1947. And it said from the get-go, from the day Israel was created, in fact, before Israel was created, this idea of trying to create a Jewish majority in that state and confiscate land in order to accommodate the Jewish majority, they said it's not reconcilable with international law. Did they realize they were saying Zionism is racism? I don't care for buzzwords, not my thing. So I never used the phrase Zionism. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the topic, and frankly, I have a material stake in it because I never got a job in academia, so all I got is that dissertation. So far be it from me to want to discard its historical significance, but I am discarding it. I never used the term. But for for practical matters, that's what they did say, the Human Rights Watch. It's a Zionism or its practical manifestation. The Jewish state as Israel proceeded to create it. The practical application of the idea of Zionism. They said it's racist. It's based on Jewish domination. Now, when you say a state is based on Jewish domination, you're saying it's racist. So I never expected to live to see it. I was shocked when I saw it. And I don't know where things are headed now.
Norma, I wanted to bring up what Biden has said about the recent conflict. And it's reviving some old thinking about Israel has the right to defend itself.
Mhm.
I just wanted to get your opinion on that.
I want to say two things about Biden. First of all, Biden's heart's clearly not into this thing. He has a domestic agenda. He wants to be a new Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He wants what they call, the term they use now, he wants to be a transformative president. He doesn't want to be dragged into the Israeli rabbit hole, and he doesn't want to be dragged over the precipice. On the other hand, the Democratic Party, the administration, he operates mostly in foreign policy, on default, on reflexes. So he just repeats the same line: Israel has the right to defend itself. And I would say, if you were to ask me, I have no basis for this speculation. I would say, based on the statements that have been made, Biden has been telling the Israelis, he's basically telling them the following. Number one, I'm giving you a free hand, except for two caveats. Right now, Biden is saying, I'm holding off 14 members of the Security Council for you. They have tried 3 times to pass a ceasefire resolution, a ceasefire statement. I've blocked it. So he says, I'm holding off the 14 for you. However, he tells them, if you commit a massacre, I'm out of it. I'm not going to support you. You're on your own. I'm not going to block you, but I'm not going to support you. That's the message, in my opinion, he's saying. So, Israel bombed the AP Al Jazeera building. And yesterday, Israel said, we presented our smoking gun evidence to the US administration and they accepted it. Blinken, the Secretary of State, he was asked, did you see the evidence? And he said today in the press conference, he said, well, I didn't see any evidence. Maybe the intelligence agency showed it. It was a very significant statement. He was saying, I'm not going to lie for you. He didn't say it directly, but he said, well, I didn't see the intelligence agency. Well, of course, if there was real evidence, he would have seen it, or he would have been told. So basically, he was saying, I'm not going to stab you in the back, but I'm not lying for you. You're on your own. And secondly, he was saying they told the Israelis, any major bloodbaths, like killing 100 people at a time, the kind of thing that explodes in the headlines, he says, I'm not going to support you. And then I have to go along with the 14 other members of the Security Council. So I think that's the position the US is basically. It's not surprising. I mean, it's Biden, who's been a stalwart supporter of Israel his whole life, and he's not about to change, and he frankly doesn't really much care. He's an old guy, probably puts in no more than a 4 or 5 hour working day at this point, and he's focused on domestic matters. He doesn't want to be dragged. There's no love lost between him and Netanyahu, because he remembers when that obnoxious Jewish supremacist racist barged into the Congress during the Obama term when he was the vice president, and carried on, like they usually do, the Israelis, like Netanyahu has to come to tell us the truth about Iran. Like, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars on defense in our country. A large chunk of it goes to intelligence. And we need the Israeli geniuses that Uber mentioned to tell us what we don't know because we're not as smart as they are, the way these people carry on. So he has no warm memories of Netanyahu. I'm sure he would be very happy if this whole thing blows up in Netanyahu's face. But it's the reflexes, the default. Israel has the right to protect itself. If you look at Operation Protective Edge 2014, what did Obama say? I have a chapter in my book on Gaza. The chapter is called Israel Has the Right to Protect Itself. That's what I always say. But I think behind the scenes, it's a little different. That's why I don't agree with people who say there's no difference between Trump and Biden. There is a difference. Trump was a pyromaniac. Wherever he saw a fire, it was an opportunity for him to pour kerosene on it. That's not Biden. Biden is, you get a free hand, but there are limits. Limit number one, no civilian bloodbaths, or I'm not going to stop the Security Council from making a statement. And two, you're on your own. We're not going to lie for you. You said we received smoking gun proof that it was Hamas intelligence in the building. No, we didn't receive that. We're not going to say it. We're not going to say it. So Blinken, like any good cagey diplomat, he says, well, I didn't see any information. Maybe some other people which is basically saying, you're liars and we're not lying for you. As to the other question, and then we'll leave it off if you don't mind, guys, because I'm an old man and I need to get my old man rest because I've been doing interviews all day yesterday and today. The other question is the right to defend yourself as a legal or moral principle. And I'm going to try to give you, normally I would give a long answer, but I'm going to give you a succinct answer. I'll try to, though it's hard for professors to be succinct. It takes them a half hour to clear their throats before they start with the bullshit. In 2003, an Israeli sociologist, a quite prominent and respected one, his name was Baruch Kimmerling. He wrote a book about Ariel Sharon, who was the prime minister at the time, his term of office, his tenure of office. And at some point in the book, he came to Gaza, it was 2003, and he described Gaza as, quote, the world's largest concentration camp ever. Now, that was, as I said, 2003. Gaza, the Gaza that we know now, what Kimmerling described was a pale comparison in misery, because the blockade of Gaza was imposed in 2006. It was imposed because of those, what Jimmy Carter called those free and fair elections, where the people of Palestine elected the wrong government. They elected the Hamas government in the parliamentary elections. That's when the blockade was imposed on Gaza, that brutal, illegal, immoral, criminal blockade of Gaza. Now, Gaza is a tiny sliver of land. It's a sliver of land. That was redundant, tiny sliver of land. It's a sliver of land. Which of you is from New York?
He's lived there though as well.
Okay, so you'll understand my frame of reference. You both know how long a marathon is, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Gaza in length is smaller than a marathon. A marathon is 26.2 miles. Gaza is 25 miles in length. Both of you have been in Central Park, right?
Yes.
Central Park stretches from 59th Street to 125th Street. It's about 3 miles. Gaza is 5 miles in width, so it's a little less than 2 Central Parks. So fix that in your mind. It's a marathon in length. It's are roughly 2 Central Parks in width. Now, who's in Gaza? You have this hermetically sealed place. A medieval blockade has been imposed on Gaza for 15 years, since 2006. A medieval blockade has been imposed on Gaza. Who's in the blockade? Gaza is 2.1 million people. It's among the most densely populated places on earth. Half the population is children. They're under the age of 18. Gaza is a child population. 70% are refugees, and children are refugees. Palestinians who were expelled from Israel when it sought to create its Jewish majority in 1947 to 9 by expelling 90% of the indigenous population. A large part of it ended up in Gaza. So we have in this sliver of land a marathon in length, 2 Central Parks in width, among the most densely populated places on earth. We have 2.1 million people, more than half of whom are children, 70% of whom are refugees and descendants of refugees. Because of this medieval blockade, half the population is unemployed. Among young people, it's about 70% are unemployed. 80% of the people are living off of humanitarian aid. 96% of the water in Gaza, 96% is unfit for human consumption. The children are being poisoned by the water. That's a fact. Now the poisoning is going to increase. I hate the word exponentially, but now it will increase exponentially because Israel destroyed all the electrical generators in Gaza and the waste management system. So the whole of Gaza now is flooded with sewage in the last couple of days. You'll see there's an article in The Guardian on it, I think. Yeah, pretty sure in The Guardian today on it. So that's Gaza, okay? Now, the question is always asked, does Israel have the right to defend itself? Doesn't Israel have the right to self-defense? Practically speaking, what does that mean? It means, do concentration camp guards have the right to self-defense? That to me is the question. Do concentration camp guards have the right to self-defense? I've read the Fourth Geneva Convention. I didn't see anywhere there it said concentration camp guards have the right to self-defense. I didn't see anything there that said under international law, you're allowed to confine 1 million children in a concentration camp. I don't even, to be perfectly candid with you, I can't even make sense of that question. Israel is not defending its sovereignty. That's not the issue. Israel is defending its right to confine 2 million people, of whom more than half, 2.1 million people, of whom more than half are children, in a concentration camp. That's what it's defending. It's defending its right to incarcerate 1 million children in a concentration camp. That's the only, I'm not being hyperbolic or poetic. That's factually what it means. It's not defending its sovereignty. It's defending its right to preserve and protect a concentration camp. I think that's frankly insane. I have a very high regard for Human Rights Watch. Now, I didn't before. Now, I have a very high regard for Bernie Sanders. I campaigned for him in 2016 and 2020. I have a very high regard for B'Tselem under the new leadership of Haggai Elad. But when I read them say Israel has the right to self-defense, I can't even comprehend it. I can't comprehend it. It doesn't register for me. It doesn't compute. What do you mean self-defense? It's not self-defense. It's people firing fireworks, basically. If you look at the actual damage it's done, It's people launching projectiles, fireworks from a concentration camp. It's basically saying, SOS, help me. SOS, help me. And then you have this crazy question. Does Israel have a right to self-defense? It's kind of lunatic that question can even be posed. Okay, guys. Nice talking to you. We'll be in touch. Between Ben and Jerry. Ben's in London and Jerry's in New York.
Yeah.
Daniel, but yes.
But you're both New Yorkers by habit.
By habit, yes. And Norm, can we get coffee if we're ever in the same
Yeah, make a point of it. I live down by Coney Island.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ever come, where are you in New York?
I'm in Greenpoint.
Oh, well, I know a lot of people in Greenpoint. It's not easy to get from Greenpoint to here unless you bicycle.
I do, yes.
Oh, then it's a hop, skip, and a jump.
Yeah.
So whenever you come down by the beach, just call me beforehand. And if you're a jogger, I jog every day at the beach. So
Absolutely. Thank you, Norm. We very much appreciate it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Norm.
Best of luck to both of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I was nervous that whole time.
Yeah, me too.
It's great.
Yeah, that's a great. I was like waiting for the through line to come out, and like clearly it's just the changing perception, which I think is like such a compelling thing to listen to. So
yeah, it was more uplifting of a conversation than I thought it might be.
yeah, me too. Man, he's harsh, but like, really that last statement that he made was so compelling, and I don't know, pierced me.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I almost got a little misty-eyed there.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Tragic. You need to go jogging with Norman Finkelstein.
Yeah, gotta make that happen. So fun.
Gotta do it. Well, this has been Villain for All Seasons, and that was Norman Finkelstein coming on graciously to speak with us. I'm Ben.
I'm Dan.
Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back next week with more adventures, and please like, subscribe, follow us, tweet us, retweet us, comment, shitpost.
Call into the show.
Call into the show. Hate mail, write your senator or congressperson. You got anything else?
Mm-hmm. We put our numbers up on the screen, so give us a call.
Yeah, call into the show. Call into the show. You can get us on WhatsApp or Skype.
Yeah. Voice messages encouraged.
Voice messages. Hashtag us.
Mm-hmm.
Hashtag VFAS podcast. Hashtag Farrakhan.
That would be great if we started coming up in the Farrakhan algorithm.
1 or 2 more episodes, and I feel like we will. It's just like in the Google search, it'll be like Louis Farrakhan related. Well, if that gets Minister Farrakhan's attention.
Yeah. Oh, I do love that we can say Norman Finkelstein is a friend of the show now.
Yes, Norman. Yeah. So thank you again, friend of the show, Norman Finkelstein.
Thank you.